Well, it's absolutely fabulous to be here today, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome Andrew, and he's given me the permission to use first names, which as an Australian makes me feel a lot more comfortable. So thank you so much for being here today. It's an absolute privilege, and as Miles said, you have a long background of experience in our industry, so I think very well placed to be talking about the potential and the challenges of our industry today. And also through your political career, you've been very much engaged in our industry. So I think with both of those backgrounds, it's an opportunity to really hear from you about where you think the industry should be heading over the next few years. And if we maybe just start off, I mean, when we have been talking in previous times about the role of the UK as an international financial centre and the opportunity for us to be the #1 leading international financial centre if we can actually secure the opportunities that exist out there in the marketplace. There's no doubt that that's become more complicated, but it would be interesting to hear from you, what do you think is necessary for the UK in order to retain and secure and enhance our position as an international financial centre?
Fantastic. Well, look, lovely to be here. Goodness knows how I'm going to do justice to that, and I caught the end of that excellent panel previously. Look, the first thing is, this is a wonderful, wonderful industry. We're enormously lucky to have it. Any strategy that any government produces of any flavour should, at its absolute top, talk about the financial and professional services. You can't have a growth strategy unless you are full squared, shoulder to the wheel behind financial and professional services. And even in a lot of the noise that we're hearing at the moment about trade, remember, most of those conversations are about trade in goods. We as an industry, you as an industry, just quietly get on with writing insurance business, offering advice, putting people on planes, making the world work. So that's my first message to the government, is I don't think that they're fully there yet. And you can't celebrate the industry in a sort of mechanical sense unless you celebrate the outputs of that industry. And one of those is, as Peter Mandelson put it, being supremely comfortable with the idea that we are creating wealth. That is what we are in the business of doing. We shouldn't be afraid of that. That is what our democratic system relies upon. And if we don't, if that flywheel, as it hadn't for a period post-2008, if that flywheel of getting people more prosperous, of giving people's children an opportunity for good, rewarding, affluent lives, then you get into all sorts of trouble. And if we look at some of the challenges around the world, you'll have talked about some of them, a lot of those are because of the failure of that flywheel to work. So for goodness sake, we've got to hold on to that with both hands, and we've absolutely got to make that work. The second thing that we have to do is remember our great strengths. And one of our great strengths is that we do nuance. In a world that's becoming very bipolar, in a world of different blocks where everyone's hiding behind walls, trying to erect bigger walls, the United Kingdom, since the very history of the first industrial revolution, since what is now the Commonwealth, has always done nuance. We are this city that we're in, this global city, is the most diverse by country of birth origin of any city on the planet. These are enormous strengths as we seek to navigate a world that is more uncertain, where people are trying to divide rather than unite. And so again, we should really step into that. Wherever there are opportunities, what I call tactical opportunities to remove or reduce frictions, then we should do those. I hope the Chancellor does not come back empty-handed at the end of this week. She can stay in Washington until she gets a deal that removes some of the damaging frictions that are being put on things like our automotive or threatening our life sciences sector. But you know what? That aside, you guys are going to carry on anyway, right? If there's a reset with the European Union, let's stop all of that nonsense of the ECB doing desk mapping exercise. Let's stop that, right? We can criticise Donald Trump for imposing unilateral tariffs, but the European Union has been doing exactly the same in a beggar thy neighbour approach to putting frictions in capital markets when the world has never needed more private, productive capital to deal with all the challenges of our time. So we should be a loud and proud voice wherever we see frictions obstacles, people trying to put a spoke in the wheel of the global flywheel of how we create prosperity, we should call that out. And then we should do what we do brilliantly, which is be the United Kingdom, work together, keep our eyes on the horizon, and allow your successful industries to do what you do brilliantly.
Well, thank you.
I could go on, but we'll stop there.
Well, I think that leads on to a really interesting question that we started touching on in the first panel, which is, at the moment, we are seeing increasing economic protectionism. We're seeing barriers going up in the US, in the EU, even in markets like China. How does the industry and how does the UK navigate through those different sort of protectionist environments that are growing? And are there other growth markets that we should also be thinking about, as well as the very traditional partners that we've tended to work with?
All of those things. Look, we've got to, and I caught the end of someone saying, look, you've just got to paint in primary colours. So we should be reminding people of our strengths as a nation. We should be reminding people even of our peaceful democratic transition of power. It wasn't to my advantage. I loved being your city minister, but by God, we did that in a fantastic fashion. Right? The German government is still not really sworn in months and months later. The US, they're getting to grips with the machinery of government. Ours, the credit, just got on and did it. So we've got these enormous strengths, the rule of law, the English language. Let's not take them for granted. It's probably not a moment to be too English about it. I'm more bellicose this morning than normal, but we're often not that good about reminding people of the strengths, why you should come to the United Kingdom, why we can offer you in that maelstrom of a world, why we can offer you great certainty, that valuable commodity when you're trying to build confidence and invest. There's things that we should do. We should not be attacking people who globally seek to take advantage of the rule of law, our heritage, our traditions, by driving people who've come here to invest, who are making a huge contribution, not just to the exchequer, but to the education, to the arts, using all of our wonderful financial services. It is a ridiculous policy for the government to be trying to bring more and more global assets into the net, to the extent that there are firms sitting down on Bishopsgate and the rest of the City of London marketing to some of the best, most productive wealth creators in our country the opportunity of leaving. What a disastrous situation to preside over. You talk about other markets around the world. Of course, we should be, and I think everyone in this room is, because whenever I go there, you're all there. But we should, of course, be in India. We should be in Saudi. We should be in the Gulf states. We should be looking at Africa, in Nigeria. And we have this great geopolitical positioning. Just remember, it gets talked about a little bit sniffily or dismissively. But if you think about the geopolitics of the United Kingdom in this world that is no longer as flat and as frictionless as we like, we are the only member of the European Union that is in this, the only European nation, continental European nation, that is in the CPTPP. We have the closest de facto trading relationships already with the US, but obviously that needs to be fixed, a little bit of kinks to be ironed out. We've got a free trade agreement in goods with the European Union, and we've got large-scale de facto alignment. We might tactically choose to do some things differently in animal welfare, but de facto we're still in alignment. And we are a founder member of the Commonwealth. 2 billion of the next middle-class, affluent savers, insurers, people who want capital to form businesses and invest in infrastructure is, I'll choose my words carefully, but that's sort of our hinterland, right? We have shared values with the Commonwealth. We're in the same time zone as a very large part of Africa. We're still a hub from an airline perspective. So we just, there's all of these opportunities. I reckon our biggest rate limiting factor, even in this turbulent world, is not what's going on geopolitically. Our rate limiting factor, as I think it always has been access to talent, making sure we've got the very best people and the very best and brightest people in the world want to come predominantly to London, but also our other great cities, Edinburgh, some of our northern cities, and do their best work here. If we keep that going, we're going to be fine.
Yeah, and I think, just to build on that, I have to say, having moved over from a number of other markets around the world, but also from my home market in Australia, having an asset like the financial services industry here that is such a huge centre of gravity, it's an incredible asset to be able to market internationally and to draw talent and investment towards. So
I would get into so much trouble, but if I said, put your hand up if you've got a foreign-born parent or you've lived over, I mean, we are a melting pot, but you've got to nurture that, right? It's a competitive world out there. There's a whole bunch of people with visas, different tax regimes. You can't be passive about it, right? And if I'm not here to criticise the government, but if there's one thing I had a wish to change tomorrow, it would be this government's cultural, systemic and fiscal attack on wealth creators. That is the big jeopardy for the City of London.
And what would you do in that case? What are some of the actions that you think would be helpful in terms of, I guess, making sure that we are still able to retain and attract that talent?
Look, I think, yeah, good on what I said, you have to nurture it, you have to celebrate it. You actually have to talk positively about the contribution that people who've got a choice in the world, but nevertheless choose to come to this country, talk about that positively. Don't gratuitously and dogmatically and in a prejudiced way go and pick a fight with the independent education system, right? Whatever you think about it, look at the wider impacts of that as another great British export business that's a beacon of quality around the world. Support those that take risk even when, now Miles has heard this speech a million times, but you've got to support people who take a risk even when that risk fails and not look for regulatory systems that, whether they say it in de jure or de facto, are trying to abstract all risk from a financial system. Don't allow the corpus of regulatory laws to grow and invade in areas. Don't be anti-innovation. Don't look at something like crypto or blockchain only through the lens of what could go wrong. Occasionally allow your mind to look at what could go right and allow places that people can innovate. So it's mostly cultural. Yeah. It's mostly cultural. There's some different policies that I and my party would have in terms of what's happening on independent education, on some of the tax policies, but a lot of it is cultural and really taking to our heart as a nation the absolute benefit, the jewel in the crown, the golden goose that is the financial professional services.
Absolutely. Well, I think certainly here at the City UK, we've done a lot on mobility and how we can continue to attract talent. And our next panel coming up will also be looking at innovation, talent and risk. So very pertinent. If I might just move to a little bit more on investment, because I know that's an area that we share a very strong interest in. If you're looking internationally, where do you think there are opportunities for the UK to attract more investment in? And are there areas also within our industry, within financial and professional services, that you think could be attractive to international investors?
Yeah, look, I'm not, caution, not take investment advice. Look, I think you probably talked, if you haven't, about, in general, our equity markets. And our equity markets, they've got all the right corpus of regulation. They're well run. They offer great predictability. If I've been a tiny bit critical, they can be a little bit turgid, but in a very dynamic world, that can also be a strength, right? Your weakness is also a strength. We're not making new policies every day. Most policy in the UK is co-created with industry, right? That's one of the great successes. That my successors as city ministers, it's sort of all carried on. There's a sort of, you guys wrote a lot of that policy, and then you can let policymakers and governments do that. That offers a great degree of predictability. There is no equivalent to what happened, 100 executive orders the day after Inauguration Day. So you've got much greater policy predictability. If you think the markets have de-equitized, then there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity as the pendulum from purely passive to sort of active passive, or some of the new structures start to fill up. We've still got great opportunities in pension capital. So there's a lot of different markets. That's the equity space. Never ever ignore private, pure private capital, private equity, private debt. and then the hybrids between the two. So look, I just think it is still one of those markets in this busy, changing, noisy world that if we play our cards right, is highly, highly investable for the wall of capital that is floating around the world looking for a certain home.
And if we think about what those cards might be and what it's going to take to make sure that the UK remains a really attractive place and perhaps enhances its attractiveness, you mentioned talent, so we've covered that. Are there other things that you think we should be really thinking about in terms of making sure that we are sort of match fit?
Look, there's a lot of, they're not intangibles. In fact, they're perversely the most tangible things. I mean, we need, if you're trying to attract, the conversation about trying to attract people here operates on multiple different levels. There's a simple, how welcome do I feel? Right? Culturally, people had different views after Brexit and things. So you've got to make people feel welcome. We're welcoming them into our home, and we have a proud tradition of that, but you can't neglect it. You've got to actively make people feel welcome in the way that other competing states do. You've got to have the hygiene right? They're going to, we're talking about top talent, schools for their kids, school places for their kids, a safe environment, housing that is not affordable anywhere in the world, and it's not affordable in some of the pace cars that we are competing with as a country. But you do need to make sure that those offerings are all in place. And if you can tick those off, we have a pretty temperate climate, right? It's not sunny all of the time, but it's not inhospitable large parts of the time either. So, if we just play to our strengths, try and minimise some of the places that we're not coming up to snuff. We're not there. We're not competitive fiscally right now. I think there's more work to do culturally. The thing I try and shake most people in SW1 about is I think there's a huge category error. Too many policymakers compare, and you'll see this if you look at the OER figures, forecasts. Too many policymakers compare us to the G7. Right? Now, if you X out the US has got some other dynamics, right? We'd all probably accept and understand in this room. If you X out the US, the G7 is the club of other largely challenged Western democratic economies. Nothing wrong with that, but if you pick that as your pace car, you are running in the veterans race. Right? You can convince yourself you've still got it like a 20-year-old, but you are being eclipsed. And so, as a minimum, we should all take as our pace car the G20. Right? Some of the faster growing economies, the Indonesias, the Brazils, the Nigerias, not all of those are in the G20, Argentina, because that will get you to really hold up a mirror as to how competitive we are. Now, as I say, I'm bullish on the UK. I don't think there's anything wrong with that mirror, but you've got to make sure that you're actually, when you're doing your training, when you're measuring your match fitness, you're measuring yourselves against the competitive pack, not the veterans. And that would be the best single thing I think policymakers could do. You guys can do it. Whenever anybody lays out a comparative table, let's not just use the G7.
No, I think that's absolutely right, and music to our ears, because we're doing a lot of work in markets like Nigeria and Vietnam and Indonesia, looking at where that growth is going to come, and our third panel today will be talking about growth corridors. So I think we're absolutely right. We need to not take our eyes off the major partners of today, but we also need to be looking at the partners for tomorrow as well, and our benchmarking that we've just released today on NSI Act will be one example of that.
I mean, on the sort of trade side of things, it is really, really important that we get the right elimination of frictions, particularly the ones that sort of unnecessary, really not working for us with the US and the EU. But there could be an argument, don't put words in my mouth, but there could be an argument that in those domains, you're sort of, diminishing returns are setting in. You've already got large trade flows. And I'd like to hear a lot more from this government. We still don't have a trade strategy. We still don't have an export strategy. We don't actually have an industrial strategy, but I think we know what will be in it because it will be an amalgam of what was in the previous government strategies, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'd like to hear a lot more about the opportunities on, where are we on the Gulf deal that was in very good shape when we left? Where's the India deal? Can we get that across the line in a sensible way? and an ambition on just getting rid of some of the most egregious frictions. We were talking about e-gates. I mean, there's many states around the world that have prior clearance of US customs, right? So if you're flying from Abu Dhabi, flying from Dublin, I think some of the Scandinavian, certainly Canada, you can pre-clear US passport control before you take off. Well, why don't we have that? Jesus, I mean, that's like, you know, for all of the talk, and this is not a point about this government per se, because that we could have had that a long time ago. But why aren't we dealing with some of those obvious frictions as well that don't need the architecture of a trade deal. They just need, you know, people to sit there and say, how do we make ourselves as a nation super competitive? Like Heathrow, that's great, right? Let's you know, properly make sure that our airport, our gateway to the world, the reason we are here today is because the Thames was, in its time, the gateway to the world before it silted up and was no use. Let's not make sure that our airport, our primary hub airport in the UK, is not the equivalent of silting up when you look at some of the other airports with massive capacity that are opening in competitive hubs around the world.
Well, fantastic. I think we could keep talking all day, but I think you've given us an incredible insight into some of your thinking. Thank you so much for taking time. It's great to have the energy and the passion for the industry so clearly manifested. Very much appreciated.
Cool, lovely to be back.